Do you know what the 8th largest company in the world is? You may not be able to guess it off the top of your head, but you could be pretty sure that regardless of which company it exactly is, the brand is probably ubiquitous. Something like Facebook or JP Morgan Chase or Alibaba. But what if I told you that the 8th largest company in the world is actually Nvidia? Now, we all know that Nvidia is a large company, but no way they're the 8th largest in the world. Don't they serve a super niche demographic of gamers and professionals? Well, you're right, as Nvidia comes in at rank 386 in terms of revenue, pulling in $21.89 billion annually. But Nvidia's profit margins are actually so high and investors are so bullish on the future of Nvidia that despite only pulling in $21.89 billion in revenue, Nvidia is valued at upwards of $1 trillion at $757 billion, making them the 8th largest company in the world. To put that in perspective, if Apple was valued like Nvidia, Apple would be worth $12.65 trillion. If Apple had such fat profit margins, the media would be all over it. But with Nvidia, they don't bat an eye. So here's how Jensen Huang created a $757 billion cash cow that lurks in the shadows. Taking a look back, Jensen Huang was born on February 17, 1963 in Tainan City, Taiwan. Jensen spent many of his early years in Taiwan, but when he turned 9 years old, his family would immigrate to Kentucky. In Kentucky, Jensen and his brother attended a Baptist boarding school called Oneida Baptist Institute. But this didn't last that long as his family would move to Oregon and Jensen would end up attending Aloha High School. From a very young age, Jensen was quite an overachiever and his specialties were academics and table tennis. When he was 15 years old, he placed third in junior doubles at the US Table Tennis Open Championship. Anyway, Jensen graduated in 1980 and he would find himself at Oregon State University where he majored in electrical engineering. At Oregon State, Jensen's lab partner was a woman named Lori and these two would eventually get married. After graduating in 1984, Jensen would score a job at a young startup called LSI Logic. The company was founded just 3 years before his graduation, so Jensen was able to secure a high-level position as director straight out of college. He didn't stick around for long though, as he would jump to AMD and to become a microprocessor designer. At this point, an outsider would think that Jensen was killing it, and objectively he was. He had a solid job at AMD, and he was presumably building his relationship with Lori. Jensen was clearly way ahead of the average broke college graduate. But Jensen wasn't actually that happy. Jensen was having some sort of early life crisis in his late 20s, and he longed to do something that was much bigger. He suppressed this feeling throughout most of his 20s, but eventually he gave in and took the plunge. In 1990, Jensen returned to school to get his master's in electrical engineering from Stanford. And after graduation, he co-founded a startup with Curtis Prime and Chris Malachowski. The trio had no clue what to name the company or how exactly they were going to fund development. But one thing they were sure of from the very beginning was that they were going to produce GPUs or graphics processing units. They felt that video games created some of the world's most computationally challenging problems, and if they could solve video games, they could solve nearly any computing problem out there. Aside from offering a great challenge, video games offered a massive opportunity. Gaming was just in its infancy, and the original PlayStation hadn't even come out yet. So there was plenty of growth left, but the problem was that these three weren't the only ones trying to capitalize on this upcoming boom. By 1994, there were already over 24 graphics card companies, and this number would balloon to over 70 by 1997. Despite the significant competition, one of the best and worst parts of the semiconductor industry is that brand value doesn't mean all that much. Unlike Apple and Microsoft, who can afford to be complacent for years and sometimes even decades, being complacent in the semiconductor industry results in a pretty quick demotion from number 1 regardless of how established you are. I mean, just take a look at Intel. They're getting obliterated by AMD and they haven't set an all-time high in 21 years. On the bright side, this meant that Jensen could easily break into the market if he created a superior product. The problem though is that it's not actually that easy to create said product, especially when you only have $40,000. Despite the difficulty and low budget, the trio got to work on iterating through GPUs which they called NV. NV simply stood for next version, and it wasn't until they incorporated the company that they came up with a name for the company itself. Given that they were naming all of their prototypes NV, they felt that it was only fitting to find a name that started with NV for the company. They never found such a word, but they did find a Latin word Nvidia which translates to envy. They simply dropped the I and that's how Nvidia was born. Anyway, about a year after founding the company and many years of working on the product, the trio was ready to launch their first product. In 1994, Nvidia formed a partnership with electronic manufacturer SGS Thomson and Diamond Multimedia Systems to produce the NV1. SGS was tasked with manufacturing the chip itself, and Diamond Multimedia was tasked with installing the chips onto multimedia accelerator boards. The NV1 would launch in 1995 as the Diamond Edge 3D, and it didn't take long for video game companies to leverage the hardware. Sega became the first company to port a 3D game called Virtua Fighter onto the new GPU. Over the next few years, Nvidia would form a couple of partnerships and launch a few bits of software and hardware. But their biggest release by far was in 1999. In 1999, Nvidia launched the GeForce 256, which they like to call the world's first GPU. This doesn't really mean much though, given that they invented the term themselves. Nvidia defined GPU as a single chip processor that could process a minimum of 10 million polygons per second. To put that in perspective, modern GPUs are able to process 7 billion polygons per second. So there was still a long way to go, but this is where it all started. Before Nvidia could focus on reaching those insane numbers though, they needed to focus on survival because the dot-com crash was rolling around. Nvidia was founded right before the dot-com bubble really started to pick up steam, so their rise up was like a rocket ship. But now it was time to see if Nvidia could reach orbit or if they were going to crash back to Earth. The dot-com crash didn't initially impact Nvidia as they were more of a background player as opposed to a consumer brand. In fact, Nvidia was named the fastest growing company in America in 2002. Ironically though, Nvidia would get crushed that same year. Within just 12 months, Nvidia would crash 90% and nearly return to IPO levels. To make things worse, Curtis Prime would retire from Nvidia the following year. So it was up to Jensen and Chris to lead the company through the wreckage. Jensen started off by acquiring some discounted companies including 3DFX and MediaQ. But Nvidia's biggest development during this time was no doubt SLI. Nowadays, SLI is mostly a joke and there's very little use for it. But back in 2004, this was a game changer. SLI or Scalable Link Interface allowed multiple GPUs to work together and produce a singular output. If you had two GPUs in SLI, each GPU would render alternating frames, so the workload of each GPU was cut in half. Now, this didn't mean that the system was twice as powerful as a single GPU, but it was a substantial improvement. Also, this invention resulted in gaming enthusiasts to buy multiple GPUs each time they built a PC, so it was quite lucrative. Aside from SLI, Nvidia also formed a handful of strategic partnerships. In 2004, Nvidia formed a partnership with NASA, where they helped NASA reconstruct the terrain of Mars using Nvidia GPUs. That same year, Nvidia would also team up with Blizzard Entertainment to create 3D graphics for World of Warcraft. Nvidia followed up these great partnerships with a nail in the coffin, which was a partnership with Sony on the PS3 in 2005. With all of these acquisitions, partnerships, and SLI, Nvidia was able to survive the dot-com crash. Remember how there were 70 companies in 1997 targeting the GPU market? Well, by 2006, Nvidia was the only independent GPU company that was still standing. It seemed like it was finally just blue skies ahead, and Forbes would even name Nvidia as the company of the year in 2007. And then, the 2008 financial crisis rolled around. After Fortune named Nvidia the fastest growing company of the year in 2002, Nvidia crashed 90%. After Forbes named Nvidia the company of the year in 2007, 2008 happened. Fortunately, 2008 wasn't nearly as bad as the dot-com crash for Nvidia. In terms of stock price, Nvidia still crashed 85%, but fundamentally, the company was much stronger. The company did have a couple of negative quarters, but they were back up on their feet by 2010, and that brings us into modern-day Nvidia. Throughout the first half of the 2010s, Nvidia was more or less stagnant. Their revenue and profits didn't change all that much and the company wasn't really growing. This wasn't really their fault though, as they had simply reached market saturation. They needed the market itself to grow larger before they could grow again. Fortunately for Nvidia, the market would not only grow, but it would explode in 2016 and 17 due to cryptocurrencies. As y'all probably know, Bitcoin made a mad dash to 20,000 and it took all the altcoins with it to the moon in 2017. Graphics cards happened to be perfect for cryptocurrency mining and especially Ethereum mining. Miners ate up the GPU market as they were willing to pay anything to get their hands on GPUs. Double, triple, quadruple the price, miners didn't care. They were making thousands if not tens of thousands from their mining rigs, and paying a premium to get a GPU was not a problem. Nvidia saw a supply shortage like never before and they were able to jack up prices through the roof. Between 2016 and 2018, Nvidia's quarterly profits jumped from $200 million a quarter to $1.2 billion per quarter, and this was just the beginning. Given that Nvidia had reached market saturation with gamers, Jensen was shifting his focus to other markets, which led him to deep learning and AI. They formed a partnership with Tesla and provided them with the initial hardware for self-driving. They also launched a bunch of commercial cards like the Titan and Quattro that appealed to institutional buyers. Just as Bitcoin was blowing up and their expansion efforts were paying off, AMD was resurrecting the stagnant PC gaming community. The launch of Ryzen CPUs made PCs much more affordable, which attracted a lot of console gamers. By the end of 2018 and throughout 2019 though, the effects of these catalysts were starting to wear off. But then, 2020 and the supply shortage hit. And Nvidia was sent up on another rocket ship and they haven't gotten off yet. Today, Jensen stands at $27.9 billion, which makes him part of the top 100 richest people in the world. Looking forward, it's not clear how much more Nvidia can grow in the immediate future, as they've already ballooned 129% over the past year. But as long as Jensen is CEO, I think it's just a matter of time until Nvidia recovers from the next setback and becomes a $1 trillion company. And then, Nvidia will be the $1 trillion shadow company. Do you guys own an Nvidia GPU? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're still waiting for GPU prices to go down. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari and I'll see you guys on the next one.